Hi, and welcome to another edition of Seniors Today. I'm your host, Tom Bartee, and our guest today is Mr. Brendan Riley. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
So I know that for our Vallejo audience, you're a well-known celebrity, but for those who don't know, you were born and raised in Vallejo, I think.
Raised.
Raised in Vallejo, and your dad was deeply involved with newspaper business.
Yes.
And so in your career, you ended up being, I think, 39 years with the Associated Press.
Yes.
Which is pretty incredible. And you said that for some reason you just couldn't stay away.
No, it was a great job, a lot of fun, and covering government and politics primarily. And it was really interesting work.
So that started somewhere around 1970?
1970, yeah.
And so you were just out of elementary school?
Yeah, right. I was just out of the Navy for a couple of years, and had an opportunity to do something that I thought I wouldn't have to be ordered around by people, and as I had been for the past couple of years. And it's true, that is the way it worked out. You know, there's a lot of independence in that in the world of journalism. If you're fair in what you do and try to be fair in what you do.
So my first job when I was 12 years old was a newspaper carrier, newspaper boy, and that's actually when I got my Social Security card. And I'm sure that you had a similar experience with that or other aspects of the newspaper business on your way up to where you went to college.
Yeah, I beat you by 2 years. I started delivering papers at 10 and did it for 6 years until I advanced to deckhand for the Mare Island Ferry Company, taking shipyard workers back and forth. That was a big step up, you know, in my career path.
Well, it could have been a big wage increase too at the time.
Yeah, I did pretty good as a paper boy, like $40 a month. You know, I was pretty well off.
Yeah, I remember one of my early jobs, I made 35 cents an hour. So
big time.
Yeah, I got to quit dating myself, even though it's fairly obvious. Did you end up getting a degree in journalism?
I got a degree in English Lit and minor in philosophy from St. Mary's. The joke in the family is that I was perfectly prepared for life in the 19th century with that education background. But it actually, my journalism experience was going to work on the Times Herald as a reporter and working for good editors, Jack Daly, these are Red Buer, people who've been around Vallejo would remember those names.
Yeah.
So I learned on the job. And I grew up around it. Both my parents actually were in newspapering, my mother and my father.
What did your mother do?
She was a columnist and a writer. She had been an editor on a Napa paper.
Oh, okay.
And again, one of the family stories is that we just didn't know any better. We thought it was normal behavior to read newspapers and be involved in newspapering because it was something we were around all the time as kids growing up.
Well, that's pretty cool. My brother got a degree in classical languages and philosophy, and his first job was graveyard shift at Fisher Nut Company. So it wasn't a very employable degree at the time.
Yeah.
But it's cool that you ended up with the AP.
Yeah.
So your district was from San Francisco to?
With AP, started in San Francisco. That's where I was hired, and then almost immediately to Sacramento for a couple of years, and then from there to Carson City, Nevada, and there in Carson City, it's the capital of Nevada, so covering all those aspects of state government, the legislature, the politics, the elections, regulatory agencies, the casino industry. It was a very interesting job, a lot of stuff going on.
And so you probably saw a lot of changes in 39 years in not just all the other parts of your area responsibility, but Nevada for sure.
Yeah, it was a tremendous growth period. You know, when I first got there, it was under 500,000 people in the state. When I retired in 2009, I think there were 2.5 million people. So, the state had changed pretty dramatically. You know, when I started, it was the tail end of the the bad old days of Nevada, the mob influences, and those kind of things, and gradually being weaned out over the years that followed. Now it's pretty sanitized, you know, with corporate structures and a lot of people whose criminal background might not involve anything more than a parking ticket. But way back, there were some very interesting characters.
Yeah, and I think in the book that you penned, the Solano Chronicles, there was a chapter in there where you talked about one of the Vallejo boys made good in Las Vegas, and his family and some of their successes and failures.
Yeah, so that's Curly Musso. Philip Curly Musso, and it was Tahoe where he ended up, and he when in the late 40s and early 50s, when they were cracking down on illegal gambling in Nevada, and he was part of that scene on Lower Georgia Street in Vallejo. His family had the Rex Club, which was a pretty prominent gambling joint. Anyway, they were cracking down on all that, and he was smart. He left. He went to Tahoe, opened a small casino in a Quonset hut, an old military Quonset hut, that he and a couple of other guys moved up there themselves. And it is exactly on the location where Harvey's Resort Hotel is today. And he ended up selling that to Bill Hara, who later sold it to Harvey Gross. And then Hara hired Curly Musso because he knew everything about gambling. And he rose to the position of general manager of Harrah's Tahoe, very prominent position, very well known in the community. One of the three guys who founded Heavenly Valley Ski Resort, did all kinds of stuff in Tahoe. He was once he cleaned up his act and got off Lower Georgia Street.
And so he lived to be in his 80s, didn't he?
I think, yeah. I think he did. I don't know exactly how old, but yeah.
You know, a lot of people don't realize how many people from Vallejo that lived or grew up in Vallejo ended up in Lake Tahoe Basin, either up near Tahoe City or South Lake. And then the other nesting area for second homes for Vallejoans was Cobb Mountain.
Yeah.
I've always found that to be kind of interesting how that all worked out.
Yeah, and there's a big historical connection, of course, between Northern California and Reno and Tahoe generally. And the mines, even way back, the mining people, if they made a lot of money, they would end up in San Francisco, or the investors would be from San Francisco and putting money into Nevada mines, Virginia City, and all that. So. A real strong connection going back to statehood and even earlier.
So one of the interesting things that that you had mentioned, of course, you probably knew many politicians over the years, and that, from Willie Brown to Harry Reid in Nevada. But I asked about the provost from Torrey University, Shelley Berkeley, who I understand was a congressperson. Actually, I think she went up through the ranks in Las Vegas and ended up in Congress, eventually running for Senate. And you had made the point that, of course, in the early years, Nevada was cowboys and mining and things like that. But after the turn of, or in the beginning of the 21st century, we now see 2 female senators in Nevada, and their House is, a majority of the House members are females.
The House and the Senate combined, there are more women in the entire Nevada legislature than men. First time in history. And it's the first time in history we've had 2 U.S. senators who are women.
Yeah.
And in the case of Shelley Berkeley, of course, the Vallejo connection to Shelley is now that she is the provost at Touro University on Mare Island. And Vallejo and Mare Island are very lucky to have her. She's a really capable person. I got to know her as a university regent. That was my first dealings with her. And then she was elected to the state assembly, and then eventually to Congress. Did a really effective job. And Shelley's a person who really, I'm not going to say, not necessarily came up the hard way, but I know that one of her jobs when going through school, I think she was, running cocktails or running keynote tickets in a club in Las Vegas. I mean, and a lot of people have those kind of jobs. She's one of those people who worked their way through school and accomplished a lot.
Yeah, I've had a chance to work with her a little bit in my job, and she's a phenomenal person and a great lady. So one of the interesting things about the media nowadays is the concept that our current president has made famous, and that's fake news. And of course, I think everything that he does is fake. I don't want to get too political here, but I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about your perspective from the side of the Associated Press and how responsible journalism is currently addressing the issue of fake news.
I feel very strongly about this. People tend to live in bubbles today. You pick your news feeds. People can listen to entirely liberal news. They can listen to entirely deeply conservative stuff. And AP, by its very creation, it goes down the center of situations. There are good ethical reasons for it, and there are also very practical reasons. A practical reason is that newspapers subscribe to the AP like you subscribe to a newspaper, and there are conservative publishers and liberal publishers, and if you go down the middle, you can stay out of hot water with either side. They know you're going to go down the middle. Not only is it, but that's the practical part, but the responsible and ethical part is that's a good place to be. So that tradition and concept is very much alive. It is not fake news in the world of AP. And when I tell people if they are willing to step out of the bubble news that they're listening or watching and get on Google and punch in the same storyline, whether it's Trump, Iran, or whatever, and then put in as well Associated Press in quotes, and you'll get the AP story. It's easy to find, and it's balanced, and so if you look for it, it's there. It's still there. Other wire services do the same, Reuters and things like that. You can find it. It's worthwhile to look for it because in the news that is really an opinion section, if you like the opinion, great, but it's good to see something that goes down the middle. That's my speech on the virtues of AP. I think it's still a very straight up part of the journalism world.
Well, I've had friends on the right and friends on the left, and they both are equally, if you want to say, misinformed, because they're only listening to one side of the story.
Right.
And you can't convince them otherwise, because
Yes.
they saw it on Fox News or whatever liberal news source that they've been, or it could be the neighborhood blog.
Right.
And for me, formerly as an elected official on the local level, it was pretty frustrating at times to hear things about yourself that were just totally generated by fake news.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of respect for the truth, if you will, and if you want to make that equivalent, AP equals truth. I'd like to believe that, and it probably is the case. And of course, I would encourage more people to try to broaden their reading and broaden their exposure to the media to make sure that they're getting a balanced message or a balanced understanding of current events.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom, and I think there is a way to. That's one way to do it. There are other ways too, but that's a quick and easy way to do it with current events and current news.
So over the years, have there been any standout incidents with elected officials that you might want to share with us that our audience might find amusing?
This is a crazy story that actually happened to me. Early in Nevada, we had a Senator, Floyd Lamb, who was basically he was very corrupt. And he actually ended up going to prison for taking bribes. He was caught on film stuffing envelopes of money into his jacket pockets that had been handed to him by an undercover FBI agent. They really got him. Well, a couple of years before that, I had done a lot of investigative work based on a tip and learned he was trying to get a bill through the Nevada legislature that would have benefited a couple of guys who were connected to the mafia. A mafia-owned and controlled casino in Vegas. Alan Glick and Frank Lefty Rosenthal. Rosenthal is in the movie Casino, played by Robert De Niro.
Okay.
Robert De Niro was very kind to him. Lefty was a real jerk. Anyway, so I wrote the story about, he denied, I called him and asked if this was his bill. He denied he had anything to do with it, and I already knew that he did. He thought that was the end of the story, and then the next day the story was on the front page of the Nevada papers that this state senator was pushing this bill through to favor these, unsavory characters. So he saw me in the legislative building at a joint hearing of the Senate and Assembly Judiciary Committees, which is sort of a formal setting. And he came up to me, and I was on an aisle seat, and he kicked me in the leg in front of everybody and stormed out, and I walked out of the room to write about it, and there he was in the hall, and he hit me across the face, with a big open, he was a big cowboy guy, the hand was like a baseball mitt, hit me across the face. And we were separated, and I went up and wrote the story about being, assaulted by this state senator, and the bottom line, it was a hell of a story, and I wrote it in third person. Reporter attacked by senator. The bill was killed. And so problem solved.
You thought you might be too?
No, he was, but that was the kind of stuff he was pulling then. He would do things like that, and then 2 years later, that came the proof of the pudding when the FBI stung him, and he went to prison in one of the federal country clubs out in the California desert for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
But it ended his political career.
Yeah.
And so that's my favorite funny story about covering the sort of the old cowboy Nevada legislature, which is what it was to a degree when I first got there.
I've worked for a number of different legislators in my time in California legislature, and one of them told me a story of a time when all the legislators were sequestered in the Capitol building, and they were going to stay there until they finished the budget. And they weren't. The sergeant at arms was not allowing anybody to leave because they had to be there in case they needed a vote. So it came time for one vote, and this one legislator couldn't find him anywhere. So they scoured the entire building, and they eventually found him in a closet that had a round portal window, and he had opened the window and tried to sneak out and got stuck. So they found him halfway in and halfway out.
That's great.
So, you know, you think about the Capitol as being a place with a lot of people, professional people that demand respect, and apparently on occasion there's one or two that don't quite meet that standard.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of funny things happen in those buildings.
So you had mentioned before that Willie Brown was kind of a powerhouse in California for a long time.
Yeah.
Are there any unique stories with him?
I has just started with AP. I was in Sacramento. It was 1970, 71, and Willie Brown was chairman of the Assembly Ways and Means Committee, powerful committee responsible for the state budget. And I was really impressed with him. I had never covered politics before, and frankly, I wasn't too interested in going there initially. But people like Willie Brown really fascinated me because of his ability to move the committee along quickly, very methodically, and there would be high-powered lobbyists, you know, with very expensive clothes and sheafs of paper and clearly prepared speeches in mind. And Willie Brown would get their names and ask them what their position was in support of whatever was being discussed or opposition, ask them for any prepared statements they had, and then they'd start to talk and it'd say next, and it'd just move them along. And he would move a lot of people through in a short span of time, which was necessary. And of course, for those of us reporters in the peanut gallery, it was great because we knew our story wouldn't drag out, our time there wouldn't drag out, and we could get on and write our stories fairly quickly.
Yeah. Well, back then, of course, that was pre-computer.
Yep.
And so you probably had to be a pretty good typewriter operator.
A quill pen, actually. Just kidding.
Not quite that far back. And then you remember all the old movies where there's a big news story, a scoop or whatever you want to call it, and all the reporters would rush for the two telephones that might happen to be available.
Yeah.
I mean, were you involved in any of that kind of scenario?
Yeah, that was, I had to cover an execution one time. Nevada, after the Supreme Court outlawed capital punishment, Nevada became the first state to have an execution. And there was a huge press presence there. I mean, there must have been, seriously, I think there were 100 reporters there. It was crazy. And there was no phone outside the prison gate. And I had learned this trick from another reporter who a few years before was covering Ronald Reagan, and he'd have to be staked out outside the governor's mansion or Reagan's house in Sacramento. And so he had a phone installed by the phone company in a tree across the street, one of Reagan's neighbors, so he could always check in at the office. So I called. I thought, no, that worked pretty good. That reporter was Doug Willis, who had a great career in Sacramento. So I had the phone company install a phone in a box on a locked box in a telephone pole right outside the prison gate. And as all the reporters rushed out after the execution to file their stories, they all had to get in cars and drive a couple miles into town. And I just walked over to the lockbox and unlocked it and called my editor and dictated the story. Wow. So that was a pretty good trick. And people were really trying to, ask for spare time on the phone in the box, and I wouldn't let them do it.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty smart.
Well, I learned from people I worked with.
I also understand that Tom Hannigan was like the right-hand man for a while with Willie Brown.
Yeah. Tom had, as I understand it, a great run in Sacramento. A lot of position of responsibility for many years. I didn't get to watch him in action there because I had moved on to Carson City. And I wish I would have, because I think he did a terrific job. I know he did a great job. for our district.
Yeah, he has a terrific reputation, and actually they're naming the new train station in Fairfield after
Yeah,
him.
yeah, that's great.
That's coming up this month.
Yeah.
Well, we probably have about 2 minutes left in the show, and I know that you and I could probably talk for hours about stuff, but is there anything that you wanted to get into the theme of today's show before we end the show?
Well, one of the things I'm doing now, I'm writing the Solano Chronicles history column that's in the Times Herald every other Sunday, and I'm having a great deal of fun writing those columns. I encourage people, if they have some piece of history that they think significant, to pass it along. You can. My email is genoans@hotmail.com. Genoans is Genoans. So genoans@hotmail.com. And I got a lot of pretty good feedback from that history writing, and so if you have some ideas, shoot them along. I'm always looking for new stuff to write about. And that the column is an offshoot of the book I wrote about Lower Georgia Street, which is entitled Lower Georgia Street, and that's what really got me into the history of Vallejo, and it's really been a fun ride, staying in touch with all of that rich and colorful past that this town has, and so.
Well, that's one of the things that's kept me and drawn me in and to Vallejo over the years is the history and the people, and also now the future of our city, because we have there's a lot of opportunity here, as it says on the signs entering the city, which I think they're getting ready to try to rebrand Vallejo again. But that's always been one of the reasons that has endeared me to this community.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why I enjoy spending time with you, because you're a wealth of information, and I know we only touch the surface on some of the stuff that you've run across in your 39 years with the AP.
Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me talk for a while about it, and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Well, we'll make sure that we'll try to get our show today on YouTube so we can share it with a lot of other people in addition to how we normally broadcast. So with that, we're out of time for today, but thank you for being here. And our show airs Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. on Comcast 27, AT&T UVerse 99, and streaming live video at vcat.tv. Come see us again next time.